tonight is sort of the kickoff of our October assembly. This year's assembly will be themed around participatory governance. So we'll be kind of talking through what all that means across a series of events. So definitely look out for workshops. We'll have our lecture series, our Black Trust series this year with special guests, as well as a quarterly office hours and tons of exciting events thrown by our partners. And definitely, James, if you wouldn't mind putting the event right in the chat so people can peruse the other assembly events. So tonight's kind of kickoff for that. The main issue people are going to be voting on this assembly is our first Ujima board, Ujima People's Board. So we have some lovely guests tonight, Sheila and Jax, who are going to be talking about this proposed structure for our board that all of our voting members are going to be voting on, kind of walking us through that structure, how we got here, and all of that background. So I think, I don't know, James, if you still want to walk through this slide.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I first do want to just really underscore Jax and Sheila and just show it's been really great working alongside them. They are both Ujima members and have supported us toward this sort of last part of the journey in getting us to a point where we have this proposal that we want to share with our membership body. And so just show a lot of, I just really appreciate their leadership here. And to sort of move forward to the purpose of this memo. So definitely to learn about the board structure that we've developed over these last, I don't know, year and a half, and review sort of what we put together. That's really what we want you all to commit to as you look at our presentation, but also as you review this document prior to voting. And this voting is going to be really key. We want people to vote as honest as possible. If you really love it, vote yes. If you have some questions or positions on it, feel free to say no and refer to this memo, this tool, as to like where, what part of the thing that you had questions around. So we really want it to be a tool in helping you make your decision on whether or not this board structure makes sense and reflects who Boston Ujima Project is.
I think Jax, if you're still on the line, do you want to take this?
Sure. Hey, everyone. So this is a brief overview of the proposed board, responsibilities and powers, what the board members are entitled to, and some details on board membership. So the Ujima People's Board is accountable to Ujima members and partners with the following responsibilities and powers: to support and empower Ujima's executive director, to approve, manage, and monitor the organizational budget, facilitate assemblies and decision-making processes, support the development and assessment of an organizational strategy, and hold fiduciary responsibilities and legal liabilities. All board members are entitled to the following: reasonable accommodations needed to fulfill their duties, such as childcare during board meetings, and access to any materials needed to make decisions. A little bit about board membership. So the board is composed of up to 5 people. Each can serve 2 years max. And the board will be composed of majority people of color and working class Ujima members.
Awesome. And just to give people a sense of how we got to this point, this process started quite a long time ago in 2017, where we at our first Streaming Wild Assembly actually had members indicate interest in a board that was majority POC women and composed of low to moderate income board members. After that happened, a couple of Ujima members took the initiative to help start a launch team to help us create our first board. And then based on their work, we got a volunteer group together that has been carrying this work forward since then. And that volunteer group has, done some peer discussion around what makes a good board. We've turned those into sort of like a one-pager document to share our learnings. We actually hosted a live event with two really wonderful experts on boards, Beth Chandler and Carolyn Crockett. And then lastly, Jax, Sheila, and other working group members actually put together the structure you see here tonight that we'll walk through.
Yeah, and I can share a little bit about the board mission, vision, and values, which went through a few rounds of edits with the working group, incorporating feedback from the Ujima staff and from Ujima membership. These were developed side by side with the organization's mission, vision, and values, so as to support and uplift the organization's work. We wanted to make sure that they weren't too disparate, set of documents. We wanted them to be as aligned as possible. So the board's mission statement refers to essentially its mandate, or it's a reason to exist relative to the overall organization's mission. The board's vision states how the board will help to achieve the organization's ambitions. And the board values are meant to supplement the organization's values. So in addition to the values that the organization holds, these are values that we expect members of the board to engage with. So I'm actually going to just read them verbatim so as not to misrepresent anything, starting with the board mission. The mission of Ujima's board of directors is to empower Ujima's leadership, support democratic member-run decision-making, and sustain Ujima's resources in order to return wealth to working-class communities of color in Boston. I'm also going to read the board vision. The board governs in a participatory manner with an eye toward the future of community power and its effects on working-class communities of color in Boston. And then in terms of the board values, we've got equity, humility, integrity, fellowship, and sustainability. Just to dive in a little bit on the actual structure of the board, we have here a few rings, and there's some alt text for anyone who may want to use that. I think they'll have to actually have access to the document in order to. But there are essentially three rings in this chart. The inner ring is the executive director. The second ring includes the actual official officer roles. And the third ring includes the core committees that we are envisioning in this group. So we're going to get into what the different officer roles and committees are, but just to name them for now, the officers that we've developed roles for are the board president, the vice president, the secretary, the treasurer, and the Ujima staff representative. And Jax is going to tell us a little bit more about those in a moment. And then in terms of the four core committees, I'm saying core because, as we'll discuss in a second, we thought there should also be room for ad hoc committees that need to be developed as we go. But the four core committees are community governance, finance, fundraising, and executive direction. I'm going to detail those a bit more in the next slide. So in terms of the committees, we envision these being 2 to 4 people each. And we did want to note that Ujima members may serve on committees without being board members or officers. And as I mentioned before, there are 4 core committees, but there are additional ad hoc committees as needed. We would just leave it to the members of the board to determine if there was a particular need arising at a particular time. So those 4 committees, just to get into it a little bit more, include the Finance Committee, which provides financial oversight and analysis, the Fundraising Committee, which is responsible for supporting Ujima staff in developing tools for fundraising and supporting the organization's finances in that way. The Community Governance Committee is responsible for supporting democratic processes, identifying additional focus areas as they arise. We wanted to keep this one a little bit open because it should be community governance and therefore evolving. And then finally, executive direction, which is about providing support and counsel to the executive director and collaborating on organizational strategy as needed.
Thanks, Sheila. So I'll get into the roles that Sheila just mentioned and that were in the graph or chart. So the first role we'll get into is board president. And I want to say before we get into this that the idea is to democratize leadership across the board. So while these names might evoke like traditional hierarchy, I think everyone here probably knows that Ujima is into democratic collaborative governance. So while we acknowledge there is sometimes room for hierarchy and difference in role and responsibility, and that's totally fine, that there is an ethos, like the Ujima ethos of shared governance in throughout this whole board proposal. Okay, so I'll start with the board president. So I won't read every single responsibility, I'll say that, but I'm going to try to get through as much as we can in the time that we have. So the board president serves as the leader of the board and provides oversight and guidance to all of the committees that we just talked about, which were fundraising, finance, collaborative governance, and what was the last one?
Executive direction.
Yes, thank you. So they serve as the point of contact for every board member on board issues. They lead goal setting processes, ensure that all board members are involved in committees, and also assigns the committee chairs. The board president ensures the board priorities and activities, making sure that they're progressing towards where they need to go, and motivates board members to attend the board meetings. The board president will also facilitate the meetings. So that means leading the process of creating an agenda and working in collaboration with the chief executive, which I think is the executive director, yeah, in this language?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So the board president will support the executive director in facilitating the board meetings and making sure that all the items that need to be discussed are discussed. They provide support and advice to the executive director. That could look like helping to develop a professional development plan and any other issues as they arise. And the board president, lastly, will help model Ujima's cultural values on the board. So the vice president is another pretty large role, and their responsibilities include serving in the president's place as needed. So when the board president is unavailable, they may step in to do to serve some of the functions that we discussed in the last slide. They work closely with the board president and are an additional point of contact for all committee members. And they help to develop and implement board officer transition plans. So when people come in and when people leave, what does that plan look like? Oh, cool. I'm seeing stuff in the chat. Yeah, please feel free to keep dropping feedback, thoughts. I may not be able to read all of them in real time, but yeah, keep it going. The vice president also takes a leadership role in staff evaluation and liaises between the board and external bodies. And they also model Ujima's cultural values. And I think something unique about this role is that ideally this role would help mediate internal conflict. We talked about this as a group that too often unaddressed conflict can stall us, but if we are intentional, it can be generative. And so we wanted to make sure that someone on the board was responsible for thinking about the culture, making sure it maintains It's in integrity with Ujima's values of participatory culture and anti-oppression. Okay, the treasurer will oversee the development of high-level financial policies and the review by the board. They'll help with preparing the annual budget, as well as its presentation to the board, and with an eye to any discrepancies between planned and actual figures. The treasurer will also ensure that the organization maintains appropriate financial books and that records are accurate and up to date. If needed, they'll serve as a co-signer of checks with at least one other signing officer. They will make sure that excess funds and reserves are properly held and invested. They'll verify that donations are handled appropriately and that grants and service delivery contracts are accounted for. And I was just reading it myself. They'll keep the board informed of important financial events, trends, and issues. Okay, so the secretary. So the secretary will support with keeping track of minutes and other legal documents that are important for the organization. They'll work to certify and keep the original and all necessary copies of the bylaws, up-to-date bylaws, and facilitate their approval by the board. And in general, they'll serve as the protocol officer of the board, ensuring that minutes are kept and posted, the right meeting notifications go out, that we adhere to any necessary meeting laws, and any other procedural requirements are followed. This is a role that I'm really glad, just like I'm also kind of putting my personal hat on and giving some commentary. I'm glad that we kept this in because, just to pull back the curtain, we talked a little bit about how important it is to have like worker power and yeah, so I don't know how much to share, but I'm just saying that I'm glad this made it in there. So the staff representative will represent Ujima staff on the board and advocate for staff needs and priorities. They'll attend the board or committee meetings as needed and jump in to support the board when necessary. This will be a rotating position. So different Ujima staff members will get the opportunity to serve as a staff representative, and the rotation cadence and term to be determined by the inaugural board members. And lastly, the staff representative serves as a liaison between the Ujima board and general staff team to prevent silos.
Great, thanks, Jax. And just to share a little bit in response to a couple frequently asked questions, excuse me. Just one second. I am recovering from a cold, but I'm okay. So one of the questions that's been getting asked is, if the board is ratified, what happens next? And that depends somewhat timing wise on when Ujima becomes a formal independent entity, but likely no sooner than fourth quarter of 2023.
I can step in. Sheila, please do what you need to do to take care of yourself. So there's a couple of questions that we thought might come up. If this October board vote reaches quorum and the board structure is ratified, what happens next? So Ujima members will be notified when the recruitment process for the People's Board begins, sometime in the fourth quarter of 2023 at the earliest. Ujima cannot formally have a board until it's an independent entity, which is in process, I believe. Selected board candidates will finalize the remaining details around the board via board bylaws. And are there term limits for board members? So board members will serve a minimum of 2 years and a maximum of 2 terms. Term limits will be finalized by the inaugural board member. Does anyone have any questions about that? Those FAQ? If you do, you can just drop them in the chat. And I'm going to pass it back to Sheila, actually.
Thank you. Oh,
yeah.
yeah, we've got a question.
Someone had their hand up.
I did, yes. I was wondering, what was the logic behind the terms? So I saw that there are 2-year terms and you can only be voted in twice, I think. Is that true? Okay. And I guess I was wondering, like, how did y'all come to that number? And like, what, I guess, is the benefit for it to be 2 years rather than like a longer or shorter a longer or shorter time period?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit, but Jax, feel free to jump in. I know we had a little back and forth around wanting it to be long enough that people were able to like onboard and actually be effective and not spend the entire time that they were on the board, like learning the processes and how to do it and how to engage. But we also wanted to make sure that there were opportunities for more people to be involved, different voices to be heard. And so we were trying to find a sweet spot between long enough to be effective, but not so long that we end up in a situation where it's the same voices indefinitely. And so that was some of the thinking behind both the idea of having term limits and also the idea of having those limits be restricted to 2 years each. Anything to add, Jax, Paige, or James from our discussions? Cool. Does that answer your thoughts on your question on that?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Great.
That's really interesting. I'm just seeing the question in the chat. Any thought to stagger terms for continuity? That's a great point. I don't think we've talked about that. But the one thing I will say is that we did talk about this inaugural board will be in some ways an experiment, right? So it will, those term limits also allow us to iterate and like adapt as needed. I think especially for the first, few years of its existence.
Yeah, that is a great suggestion though.
Yeah.
Great. If there aren't any more questions, I do want to just take a moment to talk about the acknowledgements here. Jax and I are here talking to you all about the work of many, many people. So we definitely want to do right by that and mention all the working group members and advisors who supported the work. There's a list here of some of those folks. If folks want to just take a few minutes and read it. Some are Ujima staff, some are Ujima members, and others that we've encountered along the way. And I think with that, we can pass it back to Paige and James.
Great. I'll stop sharing so we can all see each other. I think we have about 10 minutes left in this portion of the evening. So if people have more questions, feel free to drop those in the chat or come off mute. I'm not sure if you have more to add, James, as we kind of start to wrap this up here.
But definitely if folks have any reactions, questions, the floor is open to get some reactions, thoughts. This is also an opportunity for folks to actually vote. So if they in fact are ready to look at to make that call, they can do that, and we're here. But we're also open to answer any questions or also hear some reactions.
This is Maria Cristina from Center for Economic Democracy, and as someone who's kind of stumbled onto boards like of nonprofits and maybe like quasi-public entities like a BPS school and stuff like that, like at different points in my life, I've just kind of found myself in these situations. And I appreciate so much all the thought and research that's gone into the presentation that I see. And it seems like you guys are going to be giving board members a lot of, support that is sometimes lacking, when people join. Just things can be really hectic and there's not necessarily a lot of guidance or explanation of like what is your role, what responsibilities are you holding, and so I'm excited to see where this goes. And I'm thinking about like also like training and probably like sort of almost like professional development opportunities that people will be able to get through serving on this board. I mean, I'm sure you'll attract a lot of people who are very experienced and can teach everybody else. But also, if there are people who are less experienced, then it'll be helpful to have this just really thoughtful approach and to like maybe hook them up with, I don't know, some type of like, board boot camp, or, I'm sure there's a million trainings out there. So yeah, just a lot of appreciation for that.
Thank you, Maria Christina. Appreciate that. Yeah, and I feel you on like the learning development piece, like getting them ready. Definitely something for us to think about. Any other thoughts, questions, reactions for us before y'all go and vote?
So if you see this, it's a Google form, so it'll collect your email automatically. You'll kind of just input your information, and then the real meat of the ballot is down here, where we are kind of linking to this deck that we just walked through tonight, in case you want to look through the information about the board again. And then we're just asking you if you approve of the structure that we're proposing, of the officers, of the committees that Sheila and Jax walked through. That's kind of what you all are helping us to ratify. So if you like what you saw tonight, if you like the sort of mission and the kind of onus of the board, definitely vote a yes enthusiastically. If you like the structure of the board, but maybe you have some questions or concerns, you can definitely click this second option and note those concerns further down in the ballot. If you want to vote no, you don't approve this board, you can definitely do that as well. So all these options are on the table. And then whatever you vote, however you answer that question, we do want you to kind of share your explanation. That's just helpful for us to have the why. And that's basically it for the ballot. Any questions there?
Thank you all. This has been a really great coda ride. And as we mentioned, our ballot's live. So, if we've convinced you enough, you are able to immediately vote and make a call. As Sierra mentioned, it's a lot of numbers. 50% plus one is a lot of members to vote. And so we love as many people as possible to make a call here. Good, yay or nay. So tell your mom, tell your cousin, tell your people, if they're voting members, please encourage them to participate. We really appreciate it.